What if a simple mistake, something as minor as a parking violation, turned into a nightmare? What if, instead of just a ticket, it led to being handcuffed, humiliated, and treated as a criminal? This is exactly what happened to Tamara, a hard-working black woman just trying to make it through the day. She wasn't looking for trouble. All she wanted was to grab some groceries for her son. But in that moment, everything changed, and her life would never be the same again. Now, Tamara's story is not just hers. It's the story of anyone who's ever felt powerless or been unfairly treated. It's about standing up for yourself when the odds are stacked against you. Her fight against the system isn't just about the unjust arrest. It's about every black person who has ever been treated differently because of the color of their skin. Before we dive in, let us know, where are you watching from? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's dive into this story. Tamara was a 30-year-old black woman, doing her best to juggle everything life had thrown her way. She worked 2 jobs, one as a cashier at a local grocery store, and the other as a waitress. She wasn't just doing this to survive. She was doing it for her son, Jordan, who was only 9 years old. As a single mother, Tamara's dream was simple. She wanted to give Jordan the kind of life she didn't have. A life where he wouldn't have to face the same struggles she did, where he could just be a kid and not have to worry about the world judging him based on his skin color. But life wasn't always easy for Tamara. She lived in a mostly white neighborhood where racial tension often felt like a cloud hanging over her. She'd learned early on that she couldn't show too much emotion or stand out too much. If she did, people would notice her differently, usually in a way that wasn't fair. Tamara had experienced discrimination in many forms over the years, whether it was being passed over for promotion at work, or being followed around in stores, or just getting less respect than her white colleagues. It was something she'd learned to live with. It was the reality of being black in a world that often didn't value her the same way it did others. She knew she had to work harder, be smarter, and prove herself more than anyone else just to be seen as equal. Still, she pressed on. She told herself it was all for Jordan. Every late night at work, every sacrifice she made, was for him. She dreamed of a future where he could grow up in a world that treated him fairly, where he wouldn't have to deal with the same challenges she faced every day. But deep down, she knew the world wasn't perfect, and the road ahead wouldn't be easy for him either. On this particular day, Tamara was doing what she always did, running errands. After a long shift at the grocery store, she pulled into the parking lot of a local market to pick up a few things for Jordan. She parked her car slightly outside the lines of the parking space, but it wasn't anything unusual. She'd parked there many times before without issue. She hurried into the store, her mind focused on getting the groceries and getting back home. But just as she reached for the door, she heard the sharp sound of a car pulling up behind her. Before she knew it, a police officer was standing right in front of her. She tried to explain. "I'll just be a minute. I'm grabbing groceries for my son," she said calmly. But the officer wasn't listening. Instead, he demanded she move her car immediately, and when she didn't comply quickly enough, he started writing her a ticket. Tamara was confused. It wasn't that big of a deal, but before she could say anything else, the officer's tone shifted. It wasn't just about the parking anymore. He insisted she step out of the car, and when she questioned why, he accused her of being uncooperative. Tamara felt a knot form in her stomach. She knew something was off. The situation wasn't making sense. She was just a woman running errands, doing nothing wrong, yet she was being treated like a criminal. When she tried to explain herself again, the officer's response wasn't just dismissive. It was threatening. Within moments, she found herself handcuffed and shoved into the back of a police car. It wasn't until she was inside the car that she overheard the officer whispering to his partner, "She thinks she can get away with disrespecting us. People like her don't know their place." That's when it hit her. This wasn't about a parking violation. It wasn't about anything she had done wrong. This was about who she was, about the color of her skin. And in that moment, Tamara realized something she had known for a long time, but had never fully confronted. No matter how hard she tried to keep a low profile, the world saw her differently just because she was black. But Tamara wasn't the type to stay quiet. She had fought through too much in her life to let this be the thing that broke her. This wasn't just a parking ticket. This was about something much bigger, and she was going to make sure the world knew it. Tamara's mind was racing as she sat in the back of the police car. She had never imagined something so simple could escalate like this. Her heart pounded in her chest, and her thoughts were jumbled. She tried to calm herself, telling herself that this would blow over. After all, it was just a parking violation, right? But the officer's actions felt too harsh, and his words were cutting deeper than she wanted to admit. When the officer initially approached her, she thought it was just another typical situation. She knew she had parked a little outside the lines, but it wasn't anything unusual. She had done it countless times before without any issues. Yet, instead of a simple ticket, the officer's behavior quickly grew hostile. He demanded she step out of the car when she hadn't done anything wrong. And the way he spoke to her, it wasn't just about the parking. There was something more beneath it. As she was being handcuffed, her heart sank. Tamara had seen this before. People being treated unfairly, people of color especially. But she never thought it would happen to her. Not like this, not over something so small. She was just trying to grab some food for her son, something any mother would do. But the officer's harsh words and dismissive attitude were making it clear that this was never about the parking violation. The worst moment came when Tamara overheard the officer talking to his partner as they drove her to the station. His words were like a slap in the face. A woman like her needs to know her place. This kind of behavior, it won't be tolerated in our town. That's when it hit her. This wasn't about a parking ticket at all. This wasn't about her being uncooperative or disrespectful. This was about the fact that she was black. In that moment, she understood what had been happening her whole life. No matter how hard she worked, no matter how polite or respectful she was, people like her were treated differently, and not for any reason other than the color of their skin. Tamara's chest tightened with anger, but she wasn't just angry. She was determined. She realized this wasn't just a random incident. It was part of a much larger pattern. It wasn't just one officer. It was a system that treated people like her as less than. She wasn't going to let this go. She wasn't going to let anyone forget that her life mattered too. At that moment, something inside Tamara changed. She wasn't going to let herself be silenced. She had been quiet for too long, trying to avoid conflict, trying to stay invisible. But no more. This fight, no matter how big or small, was one she had to take on. The injustice she faced wasn't just personal. It was something that had been happening to so many others for years. As she sat there, still handcuffed and shocked by what was happening, she promised herself that this wouldn't be the end. She wouldn't let anyone erase her voice. She would fight back, not just for herself, but for everyone who had been treated unfairly, for everyone who had been forced to stay silent because they didn't have the power to fight back. Tamara knew what she had to do. The system had failed her, but she wasn't going to let it win. She was going to stand up, speak out, and make sure people knew what had happened, because the truth had to come to light. This wasn't just about a parking ticket. It was about respect. It was about justice. And Tamara wasn't backing down. Tamara's mind was spinning as she sat in the holding cell, the cold steel of the handcuffs still biting into her wrists. Her body was tense, and her anger was boiling over. She could barely believe what was happening. A simple parking ticket had turned into an arrest. But it wasn't just the arrest that was getting to her. It was everything that led up to it. She knew deep down that this wasn't about the parking. This was about race. As soon as she had been released from the cell, her first thought was to call her lawyer. She wasn't going to let this slide. She had to make sure people knew what had really happened. The officer's behavior wasn't just rude. It was racist, and it was part of a larger, painful reality that many people of color faced every day. Tamara wasn't going to let herself be another victim of that system. Her lawyer, James, was shocked when he heard what had happened. He had known Tamara for years, and he knew how hard she worked to stay out of trouble. To him, it was clear this wasn't just an isolated incident. It was an example of what black people had been enduring for generations. He assured her they would fight back. Tamara wasn't in this alone, but Tamara knew this fight wasn't just about her. It was about every person who had been unfairly treated, every black person who had ever been profiled, dismissed, or ignored. She needed to make sure her story reached more people. She knew the power of social media, how quickly things could spread, how easily people could be moved by the truth. So, she posted a video. It wasn't easy for her to put herself out there like that, but she had to. The world needed to know what had happened. In the video, Tamara explained what had occurred, detailing the officer's words, his attitude, and how everything had escalated unnecessarily. She shared how she had been handcuffed and treated like a criminal for something as trivial as a parking violation. The video quickly went viral. People from all over the country began to respond. Messages of support poured in. People shared their own stories of racial profiling and mistreatment. Tamara's courage gave them a voice. It wasn't just one woman's fight anymore. It was a movement, and it was growing stronger by the minute. Tamara's story reached the local news. The media picked up on it quickly, and soon there was public outrage. People who had watched the video couldn't believe what they were seeing. They were furious that an officer would treat someone so unfairly, especially over something as minor as a parking violation. Many were appalled by the racial undertones of the officer's words. It was clear to everyone who had seen the video that this wasn't about the law. It was about racism. Under the pressure of public opinion, the police department had no choice but to respond. An internal investigation was launched. Tamara's video had exposed the officer's discriminatory behavior, and now the entire department was under scrutiny. The community rallied behind her, demanding accountability and justice. In the following weeks, the officer who had arrested Tamara was placed on administrative leave while the investigation was ongoing. The department issued a public statement, acknowledging the incident and promising to take action if the officer was found to have acted inappropriately. Tamara felt a wave of relief, but it wasn't over yet. She knew this was just the beginning. She wasn't going to let the officer get away with his actions. She wasn't going to let the system sweep this under the rug. She kept pushing, keeping the pressure on, making sure the story didn't fade away. The officer's actions weren't just a mistake. They were a reflection of a much bigger issue. Tamara was determined to keep fighting until the system was forced to change. When the investigation was completed, The police department made a public announcement. The officer was found guilty of misconduct and racial profiling. He was fired from his position. It was a victory, but it was only one step toward real change. Tamara was proud of what she had accomplished. She had stood up, refused to stay silent, and made sure that the injustice she faced didn't go unnoticed. She knew the fight wasn't over. There was still a lot of work to be done. But for now, she had proven that one person could make a difference. Her voice had been heard, and her courage had changed something. And that, for Tamara, was the most important victory of all. After the officer was fired, Tamara felt a sense of justice, but she knew this victory was just one part of the larger fight. Yes, the officer who had wronged her was no longer in a position to hurt others, but that didn't change the reality that people of color were still facing systemic racism on a daily basis. The incident had sparked something bigger, but it wasn't over. Tamara's phone was constantly buzzing with messages from people across the country, many of them thanking her for standing up, for speaking out. But there were also messages from others, telling her she was making a big deal out of nothing, that she should just move on. Those messages didn't stop her. She knew she couldn't rest until she knew the whole system was being held accountable. Tamara became an advocate for justice, speaking at community meetings, using her voice to shine a light on the deep-rooted issues that plagued law enforcement and other systems of power. She attended protests, shared her story with anyone who would listen, and pushed for real change. She knew the fight for equality wasn't just going to happen overnight, but she wasn't about to let the momentum from her case fade away. The outpouring of support from people all over the country had shown her that she wasn't alone in this fight. Her story became a conversation starter, and more people began to realize that what had happened to her wasn't an isolated incident. People began sharing their own experiences with discrimination, sparking a broader discussion about race, police brutality, and the importance of accountability. The more Tamara spoke out, the more she realized just how many people were affected by similar injustices. The pressure on the local police department didn't stop after the officer was fired. With the media attention and public outcry, other departments started to take notice. Several major cities, inspired by Tamara's case, began reviewing their own police practices. Tamara wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for everyone who had ever been wronged by the system. She was determined to make sure her son, Jordan, grew up in a world where his voice could be heard and where justice wasn't just for a select few, but for everyone. Months later, Tamara received an unexpected call. It was from a lawmaker who had been following her case. He wanted to meet with her to discuss new legislation that could hold police officers accountable for racial profiling and misconduct. Tamara's heart swelled with hope as she realized the impact she was having. Her story, her bravery, had inspired change. And now she had the opportunity to be part of creating even more. She worked closely with the lawmakers, sharing her experiences and helping to shape a bill that would bring about real, measurable changes in police practices. The bill eventually passed, marking a significant win in the fight for justice. It was a step in the right direction, but Tamara knew it wasn't the end of the road. There was still so much more to be done. Tamara continued to speak out, pushing for stronger policies, better training for law enforcement officers, and broader conversations about race and discrimination in the country. She knew that systemic racism wouldn't disappear overnight, but she was determined to keep fighting for the future she wanted for her son. And in the process, She was helping to build a world where justice, equality, and respect weren't just dreams, but realities for everyone, no matter the color of their skin. Her efforts didn't go unnoticed. As her advocacy grew, Tamara earned recognition from civil rights organizations and was invited to speak at national events. She used these platforms to continue spreading her message, sharing her story, and pushing for change at every level. Tamara had become more than just a woman who had been wronged. She had become a powerful voice for a movement, a leader in the fight for racial justice. Years later, Tamara stood before a crowd at a major rally, speaking about the importance of standing up against injustice. As she looked out at the sea of faces, young and old, black and white, she knew her fight was far from over, but she was proud of how far she had come. She had taken a terrible situation and turned it into a catalyst for change. The road ahead was long, but as long as she had the strength to fight, she would keep pushing, not just for herself, but for everyone who believed in a fair and just world. And as for Jordan, he had grown up watching his mother fight for what was right, and he was inspired by her courage. Tamara had shown him the true power of standing up, of using your voice to make a difference, and he was ready to carry that legacy forward. Tamara stood before the crowd, her heart racing. It had been a long journey, but here she was, speaking about the very thing that had changed her life, the fight against racial injustice. The past months had been a whirlwind, from the arrest to the viral video to the community's overwhelming support. But now, as she stood here, she understood the true impact of her actions. Her voice had made a difference, and she was determined to keep fighting. As she began to speak, her voice was strong, unwavering. She shared her story, starting with the day she was unjustly arrested for a simple parking violation. She talked about how the officer's words revealed the true nature of the situation, and how she realized, in that moment, that the issue wasn't just about her. It was about the system, a system that too often overlooked and mistreated people based on the color of their skin. She spoke of the anger and hurt she felt in those first moments of the arrest, but she also talked about how, in that pain, she found strength. She wasn't going to stay silent. She wasn't going to let her story be buried. She had a message, not just for the people who had wronged her, but for everyone who had ever been affected by systemic racism. The crowd listened closely, nodding and clapping as Tamara spoke. She had become a voice for the voiceless, someone who had shown that one person could stand up and make a difference. Her story was no longer just her own. It was a symbol of the many people who had faced similar injustices, but had been too afraid to speak out. As Tamara continued, she reminded everyone that the fight for justice didn't end with her victory. It was just one battle in an ongoing war for equality. She talked about the importance of standing up, speaking out, and supporting one another. We all have a role to play in this fight, she said. It's not just about what happened to me. It's about making sure it doesn't keep happening to anyone else. The crowd erupted in applause. Tamara had used her pain to spark change, and now she was inspiring others to do the same. People began to share their own stories of racial injustice and discrimination, creating a powerful wave of solidarity. They understood that Tamara's fight was theirs too. This wasn't just about her. It was about all of them, and they were all in this together. Tamara's emotional speech didn't just focus on the pain and struggles. It also highlighted the hope and resilience that had come from her experience. She shared how, after the officer was fired, she had used the opportunity to push for meaningful change. She didn't stop at her personal victory. She worked to change the system, to make sure that no one else would have to go through what she had endured. As she finished speaking, Tamara felt a deep sense of accomplishment. She had come a long way from the scared woman who had been handcuffed for no reason. Now she was a leader, an advocate for justice, and a beacon of hope for others. She had shown that it was possible to fight back, to challenge the system, and to make a difference. And then Tamara shared a powerful, final thought with the crowd. We can't let fear hold us back. We have to keep fighting for what's right, no matter how hard it gets. Change takes time, but we're not alone in this. We are stronger together, and we will be heard. Her words hung in the air, and the crowd stood united, ready to continue the fight for justice. Tamara had started something, and now it was up to everyone to carry the torch forward. As she walked off the stage, Tamara knew this was just the beginning. She would continue her work, continue pushing for change, and continue fighting for a world where justice truly meant justice for everyone, regardless of their skin color. She had faced racism, injustice, and pain, but she had turned all of that into something powerful. And in the process, she had shown the world that one voice, one person, could indeed change the world. Tamara's story had already made waves across the country, but now she was ready for the next step. The movement she had started, sparked by her unjust arrest and the viral video, had grown far beyond what she could have ever imagined. It wasn't just her story anymore. It had become a symbol of resistance and hope for those who had felt powerless against the system. Her message was clear. This wasn't just about one woman's fight. This was about the many voices that had been silenced, the people who had been pushed aside simply because of their race. The fight was for justice, for equality. Tamara had realized that even though her journey had started with one painful experience, it had blossomed into something far bigger than herself. Tamara was invited to speak at several important rallies and forums. She became a frequent guest on news shows, where she shared her experience and insights into the issues of racial profiling and systemic injustice. As she spoke, more and more people were inspired by her. It wasn't just the words she spoke. It was her courage, her determination to keep pushing forward, even in the face of adversity. But Tamara wasn't just speaking out for herself anymore. She was fighting for everyone who had faced the same kind of discrimination, for everyone who felt like their voices didn't matter. She wasn't just sharing her story. She was opening a door for others to step through and tell theirs as well. She knew the more they spoke out, the more pressure they could put on those in power to make real changes. As Tamara's advocacy grew, so did her platform. She began working closely with lawmakers to push for legislative changes that would address the issues she had fought so hard to bring to light. Together, they crafted bills aimed at reforming police practices, improving accountability, and ensuring that incidents like hers didn't go unchecked. These bills eventually passed, marking a historic moment in the fight for racial justice. Still, Tamara knew there was so much more work to be done. The laws were only the beginning. True change would come when people's minds and hearts were transformed. She wanted to create a world where racial profiling wasn't the norm, where every individual was judged based on their actions, not the color of their skin. This was going to be a long fight, but Tamara was ready to continue pushing until the system was truly fair for everyone. Her personal victory was important, but it had never been just about that. What mattered was the ripple effect she had created, the conversations that had been sparked, and the momentum that was building. She was proud of what had been achieved, but she wasn't stopping. Not now. not ever. Over time, Tamara's efforts led to a change in her community. People who had once been indifferent to issues of racial injustice now stood alongside her, ready to take action. They were no longer willing to accept the status quo. The police department underwent a complete review of its training procedures, and new protocols were put in place to prevent racial profiling. As the years passed, Tamara saw the impact of her work. Her son, Jordan, grew up in a world that was slowly but surely changing. He had watched his mother fight for justice, and now he was part of a generation that was demanding it. Tamara knew she had set him on a path where he could believe in a better world, one where fairness wasn't a privilege. It was a right. In the end, Tamara's victory wasn't just about one officer being held accountable, or one law being passed. It was about the power of one person to make a difference. It was about the courage to speak out even when it felt like no one was listening. And it was about creating a future where people were judged by the content of their character, not the color of their skin. Tamara had started a movement. She had sparked change. And her story, which had begun with pain and injustice, was now a testament to the power of resilience and the unstoppable force of hope. The fight for racial justice was far from over, but with people like Tamara leading the charge, the world was already a little bit closer to the equality it deserved.